Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the January School Nutrition Star webinar on reading and understanding food and nutrition facts labels. I'm Janae Lee with the Institute of Child Nutrition, and I will be moderating today's webinar. As a reminder, all attendees will be muted. There will be time reserved for questions at the end of today's presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but due to our time constraints, every question may not get answered during the webinar today. After the webinar ends, a link to complete a short survey will appear. Please complete the evaluation survey. 24 hours after the webinar, individuals who have registered will receive a follow-up email. The email contains a recording link of this webinar available on iLearn, ICN's online learning platform, and a link to the evaluation survey in case you missed the pop-up link. ICN will send out webinar certificates of attendance within 24 hours, and due to the nature of this webinar, the slide deck will not be shared with our attendees today, but you can find this webinar available in video format on iLearn. The views and opinions expressed in today's webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Institute of Child Nutrition. ICN collaborates with USEA to host monthly School Nutrition Star webinars to provide attendees with training, real-life strategies of program implementation, and best practices for use and action plans and goals. Training topics, free resources, and educational materials are also highlighted to assist school nutrition professionals with navigating through the enhanced responsibilities of school nutrition operations. The Institute has made all past webinars available on the e-learning portal iLearn. You can find the information at the icn.org/iLearn. The topic covered in today's webinar fall under the key area operations and meet the USEA Professional Standards Code Food Production 2100. Joining us on the webinar today, we have our speaker, Betsy Pennington. Betsy is a registered dietitian nutritionist and currently serves as the lead nutritionist for the Mississippi Department of Education in the Office of Child Nutrition. She primarily assists with Mississippi Recipes for Success, menu planning and nutrient analysis technical assistance for schools, and organizing nutritional data for the statewide purchasing program. Betsy has a bachelor's degree in nutrition and dietetics and a master's degree in nutrition and food systems from the University of Southern Mississippi. Betsy developed a passion for school nutrition during her dietetic internship and enjoys the meaningful work of child nutrition professionals. And by the end of this webinar, attendees will recall strategies for accurately reading and understanding food labels to ensure compliance with meal pattern requirements. And now I'll turn it over to Betsy to share some highlights on this topic with you.
Gonna share my screen with y'all real quick.
That looks good, Betsy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so today we are talking about reading and understanding food and nutrition facts labels, as Janae said. My name is Betsy Pennington. I am the lead nutritionist for the Mississippi Department of Education in the Office of Child Nutrition. We do have a statewide cookbook that we call the Mississippi Recipes for Success, and we have an online website that you can access and see our recipes on. I help with maintaining that website and our nutrient analysis software. I also assist with our statewide purchasing program. Mississippi is a little bit different than other states because we have a purchasing program that any of our schools can participate in. I also maintain a label library of recipe ingredients for the statewide purchasing program, and I also help schools with menu planning and nutrient analysis if needed. Today, we're going to talk about mainly nutrition facts labels, and we're going to go in depth with different things that you can find on those labels. We're going to look at some ingredient list and some things that I look for when I'm assessing products. And then we're going to also talk about storing and updating our food labels. So the first thing is the nutrition facts label basics. The biggest thing to know about nutrition facts labels is that they are regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, and they're required for all food commercially prepared and sold to consumers. So if you are buying food from the grocery store or the food distribution center or anything like that, it has to have a nutrition facts label. The FDA is the organization that is going to set the guidelines for the nutrition facts labels. So they tell the companies what needs to be listed as the serving size, and then they also tell companies what the required nutrients need to be listed on the label. They also require allergen labeling and how companies are allowed to label allergens, and they provide guidance for nutrient claims. The child nutrition programs use the labels to help us determine information about the foods we're serving to our students. Of course, we want to know as much information about what we're giving our students, especially when we're providing special diet accommodations. So we will use the nutrition facts to help us make some decisions. So to make sure we're all on the same page, I know that when you're in child nutrition, you have a bunch of different documents you have to look at, a bunch of different things we're always going through. And so there's a couple ways we learn about our food. The first is the nutrition facts label. This is what we're going to talk about today. But then we also have our product formulation statements, and in a second, I'll show you a child nutrition label. We're not going to touch on the product formulation statements or the child nutrition label. I just want to distinguish that they're two different things. So the product formulation statements tell us how things are credited towards meal pattern. They tell us about components. They don't tell us about nutrients. And the same thing with the child nutrition label. They tell us about components. They don't tell us anything about nutrients or ingredients. Another thing I want to distinguish between the two of them is that sometimes you will see different information if you're looking at the two labels together. So the nutrition facts labels, as we talked about before, are mandated by the FDA, and they're based on FDA compliance. So as we said, the FDA will set serving sizes for nutrition facts labels. So here's a really good example of that. The FDA tells us that for these chicken nuggets, we have to have 4 pieces of chicken nuggets, and anybody who is selling chicken nuggets has to follow that same serving size. And that's so you can hold up a nutrition facts label and compare it to another company that's also selling chicken nuggets. You have the same amount of product between the two. But when it comes to the child nutrition label, that tells us about crediting, which can be different than the serving size needed for the nutrition facts. So the child nutrition label tells us we need 5 for our crediting compliance for the USDA. So just because you see different serving sizes on different things, it doesn't mean that either one is necessarily wrong. It means that the nutrition facts are based on FDA and the crediting is based on the USDA. So let's break down a nutrition facts label. I've colored in blue at the top. Again, that's the serving size for the label. So that tells us everything below it is for that one serving size. So for 50 grams of this product, I can look down in the green and see all my nutrients for 50 grams. If I serve more than 50 grams, then my nutrients will increase. If I serve less, then my nutrients will decrease. For the child nutrition programs, I have listed items that I typically look at on the nutrition facts label. So the first thing you see at the top and that is the biggest is the calories. So this product has 190 calories in 50 grams of the product. Then we go down and we look at total fat. We look at saturated fat and trans fat. Saturated fat we can see is 2 grams, and we see trans fat is 0 grams. And then we go down a little bit further. We don't typically look at cholesterol for child nutrition programs. We do look at sodium. So this product has 75 milligrams of sodium. I usually skip through carbohydrates and fiber, and I like to look at total sugars and added sugars. Right now, our nutrient analysis may not include added sugars, but we know that the USDA has told us that we are going to start tracking that in the future. So as you're looking at products and reviewing them, I would always make sure you're looking at the added sugar information for the products now. There's always going to be a percent daily value listed on the right side of the nutrition facts label, but we typically deal with the grams that is listed on the left side. So when you're looking at nutrition facts labels, we want to compare that information to the nutrient standards. So I've taken a screenshot of the requirements for a 5-day week, and I've put that on the side. So you can see we look at calories for nutrition. So we'll find that on the nutrition facts label. We look at saturated fat. We look at added sugars, and then there's 2 different sodium limits listed there. The first one is what we're currently going by, and the second one is what we will be going by soon. Nutrients per serving, we'll go through the label and look at all of those individually, the ones that are super important that we look at. The first one is going to be our trans fat. We want to keep products as close to 0 grams trans fat as possible. Some products like meat and dairy products already have trans fat in them, and we can't get rid of them. But since they're natural, they're okay. But as far as other products, we want to make sure that they're as close to 0 as possible. So a lot of times what I'll do when I'm looking at products is if I go and look at a nutrition facts label and it has anything listed for trans fat that's not meat or dairy products, then I will just exclude that from my search. I won't use that product because I want my trans fat to be 0. Another nutrient that we're going to look at is sodium. We do want to look at sodium in all of our products when we're trying to determine if they're useful in the child nutrition programs. But I have listed the most common high sodium foods on the side. So you can see frozen items, canned soups, sauces and seasonings, pickles, sausages and luncheon meats, and veggies with added salt are going to be your common high sodium foods. So I've also taken some screenshots of comparisons of nutrition facts labels so we can look at this. A lot of people don't think vegetables are high in sodium, and just as their natural vegetable form, they're usually not. But we do typically add sodium to them. One thing that I want y'all to notice is if you look at the second option, you'll see no salt added cut green beans. So that indication of no salt added tells me that I'm probably going to have a lower sodium product there. So with my regular green beans, I have a sodium of over 300 milligrams. But when I have my no salt added green beans, it's 15 milligrams. So if I were choosing between the two, I would probably pick the no salt added green beans in this instance. So again, this is showing you how this could impact the requirements for sodium. So we have our weekly requirements for sodium on the side. If half a cup of green beans is over 300 milligrams of sodium, then I probably need to change my product to a no salt added product so that I can bring my weekly sodium down to be within limits. The FDA has also allowed for some claims on sodium on packaging in regards to sodium. You can see what the claim will read under the what it said column, and then there's another column that says what it means. So the first one is salt or sodium free. That means that it has less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. So a product can say sodium free and have 4 milligrams of sodium because the FDA has said as long as it's below 5, we can label it sodium free. A very low sodium product has to have 35 milligrams of sodium or less. And then a low sodium product has to have 140 milligrams of sodium or less per serving. Then we have some additional claims of reduced sodium, which means that the sodium in the product is 25% less than a regular product. And a light in sodium product or lightly salted product is 50% less sodium than the regular product. And then the last one, no salt added or unsalted, means that they didn't add any salt or sodium during the processing of that item. One thing to be mindful of when you're looking at claims on products, when you're looking at the first three, salt, very low sodium, and low sodium, you are looking at a milligram standard. So you know that every time you select something that's very low in sodium, it's going to have 35 milligrams of sodium or less. When you look at the fourth and fifth claims, the reduced sodium and the light in sodium, you are looking at a comparison to a product. So if you have a very high sodium product, let's say you have a product that's 1,000 milligrams, and then you have a reduced sodium product that's 25% less, it can claim it's reduced sodium because it's reduced from that 1,000 milligram very high sodium product. But even the reduced product is still pretty high in sodium. The next nutrient we'll look at is added sugar. And this is me just highlighting on the label we've been looking at where you find that. So you always have your total sugar, and then below it you will have your added sugar information. This is showing you that 12 grams of the 17 grams is added sugar. Sometimes people like to add those two numbers together and say 17 plus 12 is my total sugar for the product, but that's not how you do it. You look at 12 grams of added sugar of the 17 that are in there. That means I have 5 grams of natural and 12 grams of added. So what counts as added sugar? Any sugar that is added during the cooking process. So again, does not include natural sugars. And if you're looking at a nutrition facts label or an ingredient list, you may see added sugars listed as items like table sugar, syrups from honey, sugar from syrups, honey, or concentrated fruit juices. Here's an example of how you're going to use this to help you determine products for your schools. Next school year, we will have yogurt, cereal, and milk product-based limits for added sugar. Right now, we don't have those product-based limits, but I recommend, especially in the spring semester, that you start looking at the added sugar in your products so that you can start making a transition to the lower sugar options, so that next school year your students aren't shocked when they have the lower sugar options in their schools. In school year 2027 through 2028, you will have to limit sugars to less than 10% of weekly calories. If you look in the middle box, I found an example of a yogurt, so we can do some math to figure out if the yogurt meets the new child nutrition requirements. So for next school year, you may have no more than 12 grams of added sugar per 6 ounces, which is 2 grams of added sugar per ounce. So I've circled 1 cup, which is 113 grams. That's what the nutrition facts label tells us our serving size is. And then if you look further down, you can see our 6 grams of added sugar. On the right, I've given you a math explanation of how we figure this out. So we have a serving size of 113 grams. 1 ounce always equals 28.35 grams. So I take my 113 grams from my product, divide it by 28.35 grams, and I know I have a 4-ounce serving of my product. I then look at my nutrition facts label and see I have added sugar of 6 grams. I divide my 6 grams by my 4-ounce serving, and I know that I have 1.5 grams of added sugar per ounce. I should say 1.5 grams of added sugar per ounce. So next year, this product would be compliant for the child nutrition programs. If it were higher, then it might not be compliant. Something I wanted to point out is that usually if you have a juice product, right above the nutrition facts label, you will see a contains and then a juice percentage. So I like to tell people the companies that, well, this company produced both of these items, but sometimes you think the healthier looking item is not always the one that's compliant for us. So we do have to serve products that are 100% juice. If you'll look in the center column, that product contains 48% juice, which means that it would be non-compliant for our programs. And then if you look at the right side, this product contains 100% juice, so it would be compliant for our programs. And then I also like to point out right here that the serving size on your juice does matter. These are really big bottles, so we wouldn't really serve those in our child nutrition programs. But the point here is just look above the nutrition facts label and you can usually find a juice percentage. Okay, let's talk about ingredient list. So along with the nutrition facts label, you'll usually see a nutrition facts label first and then an ingredients list second. And the ingredients list tells us a lot of information about our product. Products on the ingredient list are arranged in order of weight or volume. So the first item on the ingredient list is always present the most in weight or volume. I like to look at ingredient lists first for whole grain percentage if I'm looking for at grain products. We know that we have to have products that contain at least 50% whole grain, and the remaining 50% of whole grain enriched grains are considered whole grain rich. And then whole grain rich products must make up at least 80% of grains served. So when you're looking at your nutrition facts label, I always tell people to look at the very first ingredient and see if that ingredient is an enriched grain or a whole grain. So you can see in the middle in the green that the first ingredient is enriched flour. Then we have to look down a little bit more in our ingredient list and we see whole wheat flour. But if we look at the yellow, we can see whole grain wheat flour as the first ingredient. So the middle option would not be considered whole grain rich, and the second option would be considered whole grain rich. And also, if you don't know if something is considered whole grain rich, you can also get the manufacturer to provide a product formulation statement. But if you're just looking at ingredient lists, that's a pretty easy way to tell. Ingredient lists are also very important for allergens. So the FDA requires that food labels clearly identify food sources of one major food allergen or derived from major food allergen. So if a product contains or anything that is derived from milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, or sesame, then it does need to be labeled. And I will say here, if you store your nutrition facts labels and it's been a while since you have looked at them, sesame used to not be required to be reported because it wasn't recognized as a major allergen. And so some of those old labels may not have that allergen documentation on it. So my recommendation is to go back and look at all of your labels so that you do have the current ones to make sure you have at a minimum that sesame added if it needs to be. So the FDA does give the food companies two options for labeling food allergens. The first is that using parentheses following the name of an ingredient. So it may say flour and then in parentheses wheat. So we know that that's an allergen. And then the second option is immediately after or next to the list of ingredients and it contains statements. So an example is this product contains wheat, soy, or milk. So I've put on here a corn dog example, and you can see it lists the batter ingredients, all of the ingredients that it's included in the batter, and then it tells us the frank ingredients. And then at the very end, it tells us in black, contains wheat, soy, or eggs. So that contains statement needs to be there per the FDA if it has it. You may also see sometimes that a product doesn't necessarily have that ingredient in it that contains an allergen, but if the product may be produced in a facility that also produces other products with that allergen. So if you have like a cereal manufacturer, that cereal manufacturer may use peanut butter in one product. If it's produced in the same facility, then they may put a may contain statement on their other products, even if they don't have peanut butter in it, just so you know that this product really should not have this allergen, but it could. And so you'll see either may contains or produced in a facility that also uses that product. There is some additional food labeling that the the FDA does require, even for items that aren't necessarily considered allergens. A big one is going to be gluten. It's found in wheat, barley, and rye. And we have a lot of people that have gluten sensitivities, so they do require that to be labeled. And if a product does say that it's gluten-free, then legally it has to be gluten-free. They also require that certain food additives be labeled. They have to label yellow number 6, color additives made from cochineal extract and carmine, and then various sulfiting agents, including sodium bisulfite. So if you have anyone that has sensitivities to those, they should be highlighted on the nutrition facts on the ingredient list. Okay, this is a common sources of food allergens. I actually this is a screenshot from one of the ICN resources that they put out. So you can see the food allergens on the side, and then there's a column that says foods containing the allergens, and then other possible sources of the allergens. A lot of times when we think about allergens, we think about just when they're the main item in the dish. So for instance, we know that fish is going to be in fish sticks, but then there's some items that probably also contain the allergen that aren't as obvious. So for instance, fish could also be in barbecue sauce or salad dressing or Worcestershire sauce. So what I would do with this chart specifically, I have one for each allergen on the next 3 slides, but I would make sure that this chart is somewhere that your managers can see it and have them look at the labels for not only the items that we know contain the allergen, but also look at labels for items that potentially contain the allergen. One that always surprises me is that milk is sometimes in hot dogs, because I would never think, oh, let me go check the hot dogs when I have a milk allergy. Here is the chart for peanuts, sesame, and shellfish. Give y'all just a second to look at it. And this one is for soy, tree nuts, and wheat. Okay, let's talk about storing and updating food labels. When should we review food labels? There is many parts in the flow of food that you may want to review food labels, and it's always a constant rotation of when you should be doing that. So I sometimes like tasks that you finish at one time and then you're done. That will never be the case for food labels. So this is where I think your big points are for looking at it. First is going to be procurement and purchasing process. When you're looking at products, you can always compare 2 products to one another. So as we were comparing the vegetables to begin with, so we compared our 2 vegetable products together. You can also set in your bid specifications parameters. So you want this product to be under 250 milligrams of sodium. Then you can automatically exclude any products that don't meet that requirement. After you've procured the food and they're on your purchasing guide, you need to look at it for your nutrient analysis. So a lot of people will take that label after they have done it, after they get their food and they put it into their nutrient analysis software. At that point, that's where you analyze your menu and see if it falls within the program meal pattern requirements. But we also have to remember that we have to constantly go back to that nutrient analysis software and update our labels and our nutrient information if anything changes. Then we need to look at receiving and delivery. And this one is where, a lot of times, especially managers and other cafeteria staff, are not really involved in the procurement or nutrient analysis process. They typically just cook what is delivered to them. But sometimes at delivery and receiving, different products are delivered. So you may order one thing from your distributor and they may be out of that product and they may say, well, can I send you a new product instead? And if you say yes, then there's always potential that that product has a different allergen in it than the one that you were originally going to get. So I always tell people, check your labels again at receiving and delivery. Even if you think you know the allergens that are in the product, even you might get a different product. There's also potential that the company updated that product, and you need to continuously look at that product to make sure that there's no new allergens in it. So I would be very mindful to my staff and train my staff to make sure that they're always looking for that. And then finally, menu planning specifically for special diet accommodations. And y'all know this, we've talked about how you look for allergens on the label. And so that's going to be your biggest thing, is going back and making sure that you have all that information. This is just a practical example of how I store food labels. Like I said, the Mississippi Department of Education is a little bit different than other states because we do have our statewide purchasing program that our schools participate in. That means that I know the products that are being delivered to our schools, or the products that should be if there's no emergency substitutions. So I store all of our labels and I give access to these to our schools. So this is 2 screenshots of how I do that. So the first screenshot you see on the left side is I organize our labels by the way that they credit. So the first folder contains anything that credits as a meat alternate or a combination food item. So my pizzas are in my first folder. Then I have my grains, my fruits, my vegetables. Dairy products includes milk, but it also includes anything that I might get from the dairy distributor, which is like sour cream and that kind of thing. Number 6 is dressing, sauces, and condiments. And number 7 is staples and other ingredients. That includes things like flour that it might credit as a grain, but in its current state, we wouldn't really eat just spoonfuls of flour, so it goes in staples. And then the screenshot on the right shows you, if I clicked on meat alternate, this is what comes up. So I have all of them organized into beef, fish, seafood, pizza, all these categories that my meat alternate might fall into. And when you click on that, it brings you to the label itself. So I know if I think that some product might have something in it and I need to show a label to a parent or something like that, then I can just go find the category it belongs to, find the folder, and pull a label immediately. If you are keeping up with food labels, I have 3 major tips. The first one is, if you're ever confused about nutrient documentation, always ask questions. I deal with labels day in and day out, and so I want to make sure that I understand everything that's written on that label. And so I will, if I don't understand something, will call the company and ask them to provide me for further information. Also, food manufacturer companies, most of the time, will have a website and an inquiry option on that website. So if you're using their product and you're like, I don't understand whatever part of the nutrition facts label, or maybe it's missing something, you can go and submit an inquiry and someone will reach out to you with that information. Tip number 2 is to form a relationship with your food brokers, distributors, and they can help you stay up to date on labels. Every time I go to a food show or I communicate back and forth with a broker about getting a nutrition facts label initially, I will then ask them, if you know that this formulation changes, please send me a new label. Because they know when things change and they know you use their product. And so I just ask them to add me to their email list and just email me a new label anytime you know it changes. And then from there, I always update my label storage. And then my tip number 3 is review product labels every 6 months at a minimum to update nutrients, crediting, and allergen information. Especially for your products that are going to be sugar restricted next year, your yogurt, cereal, milk. A lot of those companies are going through reformulation so that they continue to meet USDA guidelines. And because of that, I would recommend redoing any labels for those items that you might be storing. I typically will pull an order guide and look at all labels in the summer, and then in between the 2 semesters, in between the fall and spring semester, when everyone's on break, I'll typically pull an order guide and pull new labels at that point. So just to recap, we talked about the nutrients that should be considered when deciding between products. We're really looking to see if items can help us meet the meal pattern requirements. You look at ingredient list to determine allergens, and we talked a little bit about whole grain versus not. And then we talked about reviewing nutrition facts labels and how we should store them. I do want to point you in the direction of some additional resources. The ICN has some great resources for child nutrition professionals. The first one is school food allergy fact sheets. It tells you about the allergens and different tips on how to deal with that. They have one on nutrition standards for added sugar. They have iLearn courses on various topics. They also have a new course called Shaking It Up Sodium Reduction in School Meals. If you have a hard time staying under that sodium requirement, then that resource can be useful. The USDA has great guidance called Accommodating Children with Disabilities in School Meal Programs. If you have questions about allergens and how you should be accommodating those students, that's a great resource for that. And then I did just list the FDA on here. Again, a lot of times we think of just the USDA as having the major authority in our programs, and that is true. But the FDA ultimately decides what's documented on the nutrition facts label and any claims that are mentioned on food packaging. So if you need specific resources for that type of item, you're going to need to look at the FDA for that. Are there any questions?
Great job, Betsy. What a very great presentation.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of today's webinar. And I see that we have several questions that have been submitted. Um, so we have a question from Kristen who said, if you rinse canned vegetables, will it lower the sodium that is consumed?
Yes, you can. Yes, Kristen, you can lower the sodium that is consumed. But what the hard part of that about that is when you're putting it into the nutrition fact, you're putting it into your nutrient analysis software. I always like for my every ingredient I have in my nutrient analysis software to match my nutrition facts label. And most nutrient analysis software does not have a mechanism of determining what the actual sodium content is after you have rinsed the vegetable. So it would be hard to, in your nutrient analysis software, determine what the actual sodium of the product is even after you rinse it. So my recommendation is instead of doing that, instead of buying a high sodium vegetable, rinsing it, and then hoping you knock off a lot of the sodium, my recommendation is just to buy the low sodium option so that you know for sure what the sodium content is and you don't have to deal with that not knowing of sodium. Also, one more thing on that
Yeah.
is that if you do get audited, if your program specialist or whoever is doing your audit questions it, then you'd have to somehow support how you know it has lower sodium. And the best thing to do is just go pull a nutrition facts label.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Betsy, for providing a really great response for that.
Thank you.
Um, okay, so it looks like we got another question from Mary Barber, who asked, is the gluten-free label all gluten-free, or can it contain a small amount to be labeled gluten-free?
If it says it is gluten-free, it has to be gluten-free. So
Mhm.
if it has any gluten in it at all, it cannot have that nutrient claim on there.
Awesome. And then I know we had some questions regarding the allergen charts. We do have the food allergy resources that Betsy mentioned that are on the ICN website. You will find a lot of great resources if you go to the food safety portal on the ICN website and can find really great resources on food allergies and some fact sheets there.
Mhm. There's so many questions on that. Yeah, y'all go look at
Yeah.
that. The ICN resources.
All right, let's see here. I'm trying to clear that out. Okay. Um, okay, there's a question that's been upvoted. They ask, how do you know what starch is in modified food starch?
I was looking at that question and I was trying to think about it. I don't have an answer for you right now. I'd have to look at
Which
the
is totally
FDA
fine.
website to give you an answer.
Yeah, so yeah, we can, if you will, follow up through our help desk and we'll be sure to get that answer for you.
Mhm.
And if you land on one that you see, Betsy.
Okay, I can answer this one by Mary. It says, when you are declaring allergens in your food service, oh goodness, it moved. When you are declaring allergens in your food service software, do you include the allergens from products that state manufactured in a facility that also processes? Um, I think this is a good question. And the nutrient analysis software, some nutrient analysis software companies allow you to either say this product contains or this product might contain. Like the nutrient analysis software will give you an option to do both of those. If the nutrient analysis software does not give you an option, I would always err on the side of caution. If it said might contain, then I would put it in as contained. That way I know that if a student eats it, or if the allergen alert shows up, that it wouldn't be a problem for my student to skip out. But if it might actually be in there, then I obviously don't want them to eat it if they're allergic to it. So I would err on the side of caution there.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, we have a question from Karen, and we have 3 upvotes for it. Can you quickly cover the sugar calculation again?
Yes, let me share my screen with you.
Yeah, go for it.
And I will say, like, you don't always, oh, I think I have to skip through every slide.
Good.
Can y'all see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, let me share screen.
And while Betsy's pulling that up, I see some questions on getting a copy of the PowerPoint slide. So for this webinar, we are only doing a recorded version. So you all can find the recorded version of the whole presentation at in our e-learning portal called iLearn. So I will go ahead and put that in the chat.
Okay, I think you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay. Um, so this is the sugar calculation that I was talking about. We look first at the serving size of the item. So this item tells me that it's 113 grams. And I put that first as my serving size. And then every single time you have 28.35 grams, that equals 1 ounce. So I divide 113 grams by 28.35 grams to learn that my product is 4 ounces. Sometimes this math would not be necessary because if you look at the picture of the yogurt right here, you can see that it says 4 ounces, 113 grams. But I just did the math so you know where that is coming from. If you only have grams listed, you could figure out the ounces of your product by dividing it by 28.35. But I know that I have 4 ounces of my product. I see my added sugar is 6 grams. So I divide 6 grams of added sugar divided by 4 ounces, and that gives me 1.5, it should say grams of added sugar per ounce. So this product would be compliant.
Thank you so much, Betsy, for going through that again. There's a question that's been upvoted. Jane asks, what nutrient analysis software do you use?
I use 3 different nutrient analysis softwares, but the state agency is not allowed to promote nutrient analysis software. So I always just direct people to the USDA approved nutrient analysis software list. And then from there, you can use anything that the USDA approves.
Thank you. All right, let's see what else we have.
I can answer the one from Kristen. It says, if
Okay.
a nutrition label has enriched flour as the first ingredient and whole grain is second place, is that compliant for whole grain requirement? That gets tricky because the answer could be yes and it could be no. The whole grain rich requirement is 50% of the product is whole grain. So most of the time, if the enriched flour is listed as the first ingredient, you probably need 2 whole grains after it. But it's potential that you wouldn't. So in that situation, if I didn't know, but I believe the product could be, then I would reach out to the the manufacturer and ask for a product formulation statement.
Thank you for that. Let's see. We have
Someone
some
says,
really,
I do have a question. Oh, sorry, Jenny. Is it
no,
okay to
you're
read this
good.
one? Okay, so this one says, I do have a question about the formulation statements. When do we use those? When do we need to use those? The formulation statements are needed for anything that you don't know how it credits. And I always tell people use them before you get the product. You need to be able to verify what the crediting is for each item that goes into your meals. And the only way you do that is if you get the label before you serve the item. So when you're going through your process, ask for the product formulation statements. It's for anything that you don't know what the item is. So for instance, for pizza, I don't know how many ounces of grain are in there, and I don't know how many ounces of meat alternate. So I always need a label for my pizza. For vegetables, half a cup of green beans is going to be half a cup of vegetable. There's nothing added to it, so I don't need a product formulation statement for that.
Awesome. Okay, we have a question from Molly. Molly asks, the nutrition fact labels, CN labels, product formulation statement that you showed, are they just the ones provided online by the vendor or actual pictures of the physically boxes you receive in-house?
That's a good question, Molly. So from the state, at the state agency, I don't ever order food. So all of those are provided by our brokers or distributors, things that I find online. And I think either way is fine, honestly, because we always are constantly updating them. I change a label at least once a day, and that's just from pulling it online. My recommendation though is the ones that I have in my label library have a date on them. So I know that the manufacturer created this label on, I don't know, March 22nd, 2022. So I will go back in and say, okay, now it's January 30th, 2025. If I have a 2022 label, I want a new one. So then I'll go back and get a new one from there.
Awesome. And then we have a question from Maria. Which uses less preservatives, frozen food or the canned?
Oh, I think that depends on the item. It depends on how the manufacturer is processing the item. I would say in general, ooh, I don't know. I don't think I could answer that question either way. It depends on the manufacturer and how they're processing the item. Because you could have a meat that a frozen shelf stable meat product that probably has a lot more preservatives than a frozen meat, but
It all just depends on the item.
depends on the item. It depends on the
Yeah.
item and the manufacturer. Yeah.
Yep. All right, let's see. I see a lot of comments I'm trying to get rid of.
The charts, yeah. Is it every
So Jane had a follow-up question. She said, let's see. She said, based on the nutrient analysis software, is it
Mhm.
beneficial just to use one, or what's the benefit in using more than one?
Oh, I think as a school, you only need to use one. The only reason I have used multiple of them is because I'm at the state agency level, and so I assist people in all different software. So I look at different ones, but no, as a school, it would actually be too cumbersome to have different ones.
Mhm.
Also, I just like to know the math behind the different ones. I like to play around in them.
All right, we have a few more minutes. We can take maybe 2 to 3 more questions. Let's see.
There's one by Heather. It says, will there be a way to add product formulations to the raw or food buying guide? That one is, there probably should never be a product formulation statement in the food buying guide, and that's because the food buying guide is just individual ingredients and how those ingredients are used in products. So for instance, you'll find like a chicken breast and it's just a chicken breast. All chicken breasts are pretty much the same. But then pizza will vary by manufacturer. So there's no way that the ICN could, the USDA, who has the food buying guide, would be able to take every single pizza that's manufactured and put them in the food buying guide. So, and that will change depending on the formulation from the manufacturer. So you'll always get the product formulation statements from a manufacturer. Someone says, do you really change your labels every 6 months? Yes, I do. I do at least every 6 months, if not more frequently.
I just caught that one. Molly asks, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, add more based on Molly's question. Is there a regulation that states how often you need to get a new label? I don't know that there is a regulation that states how often you need to get a new label, but the reason why I do it so frequently is because number one, like I said, the reformulation of ingredients. So any of the cereals that we have now that may be reformulating to be lower sugar, I obviously in my nutrient analysis want that to be reflected as lower sugar because it helps me meet meal pattern requirements. The second reason is because it just gives me information about my product. If I have a child that has an allergy, then I want an updated label every single time I can get one to make sure that nothing changed in that facility, that a new allergen was introduced. And the only way I know that is if I am constantly reviewing my labels and getting new ones.
We had a question from Kayla who asks, we keep seeing labels, but should we also be keeping on file nutritional labels from the back of everything we serve?
I recommend keeping nutrition facts labels. Once you kind of get your library started, it doesn't take as long to update it. I personally don't take pictures of the products that that the schools receive physically. I just ask the broker or the manufacturer for that item to send me a digital version. And I've never not been able to get a digital version.
We had a question about where to find those charts. So the food allergy resources and fact sheets, if you go to the ICN website and you type in food safety resources, or you go to the tab that says resources from A to Z and go down to food safety resources, you'll be able to find the food allergy fact sheets from there. Okay, we may have time for one more question. Let's see.
This one from Patton is kind of interesting. It's specific and it's mathy, but it makes a little sense. It says formulation statements for meatball says 3 ounce credits as 1.5 ounce meat. Each meatball is 0.5 ounce. Math credit says 0.25 credible ounce meatball. Anyways, can I just make the portion size 8 meatballs to get 8 ounces meat? So my answer to this is you don't have to go by the portion size that's listed on a nutrition facts label or the child nutrition label. You can do the math and make sure that you're doing the crediting the way that you need for your individual recipe and then credit the item that way. So if you know that if you want to meet 2 ounce credit, but your formulation statement says 1.5 ounce, you can increase your serving size to equal 2 ounce credit.
I just saw that. Okay. Thank you for tackling that one.
There's one that says, do you have any suggestions on an efficient way to provide modified menus to school food service managers for children who have food allergies? Or do most schools just have the managers read food labels and remove potential food allergens from a student's meal? I think this is a combination between what the director would do and what the manager would do. And it varies by school. If you have a nutrient analysis software that you're putting in information into, then they may or may not, it depends on the nutrient analysis software, have alerts that you can set up for allergens. The other thing is that I know of some schools that have like the form that they fill out, that the parent will fill out and explain the allergen, get the doctor's note, and then they can call the parent in and ask, like sit down with them and review the menu and get information from the parent. That way they have a better understanding. And then my recommendation is always, as a director, take the information you learn from the parent and then go to the manager and you have a one-on-one conversation with the manager and say, these are the items that we're serving this week, and this one may be a potential problem. Let's talk about how we're going to, serve a different item or modify or whatever you need to do to meet the child's diet needs. And then over time, the manager will start to learn and can have a little bit more freedom. But my point is that a lot of times the director will have a conversation with a parent and then not turn around and have a conversation with the manager and expect the manager to know what's going on. So always have a conversation with the manager and explain why you're making modifications so that the manager is learning how to make those modifications in the future.
Yeah, that's a really great point with the communication there. So we do have a few reminders that I wanted to get out there. I do want to thank everyone for putting your questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Betsy, for tackling those questions and providing such a great informative presentation today. And now I'm just going to get into a couple of reminders. Let's see what we have. Okay, so we do have an upcoming webinar that is scheduled for Tuesday, February 27th. If you will, join when the registration links becomes available. We will love to have you on. The topic will be mastering fresh food preparation in schools, scratch cooking best practices. We will have some awesome directors on to provide some really great strategies for that. So again, when that registration link is available, on the ICN website. Be sure to register and be there with us on February 27th. And I'm sorry, that should be Thursday, February 27th. And as final reminders, this webinar has been recorded and it can be viewed on the e-learning portal iLearn. The webinar certificates will go out in the next 24 hours. Please complete the evaluation survey for this webinar. It will pop up once this webinar ends, as ICN really appreciate the feedback that you all submit to us. And in closing, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Betsy, thank you so much for being on. We'll love to have you again on the next one, and have a great day.